Hello, everyone, and welcome back. In this episode, I feel it's important to address one of the biggest hurdles towards making unity work, and in the process, perhaps give an idea of what could be done to alleviate some of the apprehension Unionists have when it comes to Irish unity. We Unionists place a great deal of importance on our physical heritage. Old statues, monuments, memorials, buildings, these things are treated as a sort of sacred trust inherited from our ancestors, which we in turn have a duty to preserve for our descendants. As a culture, we could be said to adhere to an idea which may be called the Great Chain of Civilization, this being a metaphorical chain anchored in our cultural past, which gives us something with which we can define ourselves as a distinct people. Each generation forges a new link in this chain by creating new heritage for the future, whilst maintaining those links forged by previous generations, thereby making the chain of our civilization longer and more impressive. The responsibility will eventually be passed to the next generation, who will continue to preserve the chain as it has been passed down to them, and who will eventually forge a link of their own via the heritage that they themselves will create. Each new generation preserves what has come before and builds upon it, and as a result, each generation ends up part of a great chain of heritage that goes all the way back to our cultural roots, and which provides us with a very strong and clear sense of identity. Effectively, we believe that the preservation of what has been passed down to us from our ancestors is the sacred duty of our culture. We not only have an obligation to past generations to preserve what they have passed down to us, but also to future generations so that they can enjoy the same privilege of cultural continuity and rich heritage that we do. Since our reverence for our cultural heritage is what sits at the heart of the Ulster Unionist identity, we are deeply untrusting of those we believe who may have designs to undermine or destroy it. And in the modern Unionist community, there is always a sense that Irish nationalism intends to do just that. The fact that even something like the demolition of the Boyne Bridge in Belfast earlier this year in order to make way for the construction of Belfast Grand Central Station can spark protests is a symptom of just how much concern there is that our physical heritage is under threat. Our protectiveness has been so hyper-intensified by this concern to the point that even a bridge with actually very little real cultural significance becomes something to rally around. To Ulster Unionists, to the Ulster Scots people, the prospect that one day new links in our cultural chain may cease to be forged, or the chain cut or destroyed, and the anchor to which our culture is rooted lost to the mists of time and apathy, is quite possibly one of the most dreaded prospects imaginable. As such, the commitment of Irish republicanism to the preservation of our culture and our heritage, the assurance that the forging of new links in our civilizational chain will continue, would be a very powerful gesture of goodwill indeed. One which would not only build a great deal of trust for Irish republicanism from Unionists, but may even convince some Unionists that a united Ireland may well even be to our culture's benefit. This could be especially so if, as a result of Republican enthusiasm to see our culture maintained, it actually ends up being supported to a greater extent in a united Ireland than it had been in the UK, where our culture has generally been treated with a fair amount of apathy by the establishment. This can only happen, however, if Irish Republicans do make an effort and don't instead try to erase Unionist culture in the name of something like, say, decolonisation following unity. Our fears that Irish nationalism and republicanism have designs to erase our culture and identity are certainly not without historical precedent. Unfortunately, despite the professed symbolism of the tricolour and the promises of the Irish Proclamation of Independence to treasure the children of the nation equally, Irish nationalism has, over the last century or so, gone out of its way to erase much of the heritage important to the Unionist tradition across Ireland. For example, there was the King William of Orange statue in Dublin, which had been erected on College Green in 1701. This statue was not well liked by Dublin's Catholic majority, however it had a special historical significance to the city's Protestant minority, as well as to the Protestants of Ulster. Not only was it considered an important cultural relic of the Orange tradition, there was also the fact that the base of the statue had been chosen in 1779 to be the site where the Irish volunteers of the 18th century would hold their Relief of Ireland rally. I'll talk more about that in the next video. The statue was frequently defiled by supporters of Home Rule during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and so it was requested by a number of Ulster Protestants that the statue be sent to Belfast where it would be more welcome. This request was refused, and the statue was eventually destroyed in 1928 on Armistice Day, seemingly done on such a symbolic day to make the insult behind its destruction as plain as possible to Unionists. Another example would be Nelson's Pillar, a tall column built in 1809 in honour of Lord Horatio Nelson's victory at the Battle of Trafalgar, at which over 4,000 Irishmen had served in Nelson's fleet. The pillar towered over Dublin and contained a spiral staircase which allowed visitors to look over the entire city and the surrounding landscape. Standing on a pedestal just above the viewing platform was a statue of Lord Nelson. The smaller Nelson's Column, built in London between 1840 and 1843, was actually based on the pillar in Dublin. As Irish nationalist sentiment grew with the rise of the Home Rule movement, repeated calls for the statue to be taken down were made. The pillar eventually met a similar fate to the King William statue, being destroyed in 1966. It was eventually replaced by the Spire of Dublin in 2003. Even before it was blown up, there had often been much talk of removing Nelson's Pillar in the years following Irish independence. This was opposed by Protestant Irish nationalist William Butler Yeats, who argued the following: "If another suitable site can be found, Nelson's Pillar should not be broken up. It represents the feeling of Protestant Ireland for a man who helped to break the power of Napoleon. The life and work of the people who built it are part of our tradition. I think we should accept the whole part of this nation and not pick and choose." His words in the end would fall on deaf ears. There are many other examples of British Unionist or Orange monuments destroyed by the actions of Irish Republicans over the years, and they aren't just limited to the Free State and Republic of Ireland. For example, a monument with a great deal of cultural importance to the City of Londonderry's Unionist population, a monument known as Walker's Column, was destroyed by the IRA in 1973. However, the most significant of the Orange monuments to be destroyed by Irish Republicans was undoubtedly the Boyne Obelisk. Built in 1736 at the site of where the Williamite forces crossed the Boyne River during the Battle of the Boyne, the Boyne Obelisk was historically one of the most important pieces of cultural heritage in existence to the Orange tradition. For centuries, it had taken on the status of something of a sacred site to Ulster's Protestants, who would often travel south in order to visit it in the run-up to the 12th of July as part of something of a cultural pilgrimage. In 1923, it was destroyed by members of the Irish Free State Army and never rebuilt. In the modern day, the ruined stump of the obelisk still sits as a powerful example to Unionists of the disingenuousness of Irish republicanism's claims of valuing the Orange tradition in any way. As the Larne Times put it shortly after the obelisk's destruction, "Some southern people are very anxious to get the North into the Free State. Do they for a moment suppose that insult and outrage to the memory of a man who is specially venerated in Ulster will hasten that day? It is not so much the destruction of the material substance that is significant in this case, but the spirit that lay behind it." One of the most important monuments of our culture was destroyed by those who stick our colour in their flag and so often try to tell us that our fears of nationalist hostility to our culture are unfounded. This would be the equivalent of the British government having the Garden of Remembrance in Dublin destroyed, and then telling Irish nationalists that any accusations of anti-Irish sentiment are unfounded because there happens to be a red diagonal cross in the Union Jack. Over the last 100 years or so, Irish nationalism has so often treated our culture and its monuments as something akin to a foreign blight in need of being purged from the island of Ireland in the name of anti-imperialism. Even into the modern day, many Irish nationalists will still advocate for the destruction of Unionist heritage as something which they believe has no place in their vision for Ireland, or they will act as though the very presence of Unionist culture is something inherently offensive to them. So long as the prospect remains that a united Ireland could result in the destruction of so much of our heritage in the north as it did in the south following independence, it will be extremely difficult to convince Unionists to feel anything other than apprehension regarding the prospect of Irish unity. In my opinion, there is a simple fix which could alleviate this apprehension, however, that being the placing of legal protections on Unionist heritage sites in order to ensure that they will be properly maintained and protected from vandalism, and will not simply be torn down following unity. These protections could be written directly into a United Ireland's constitution in order to ensure that there is no chance of them being repealed by bad actors at some point in the future. I would also advocate extending these constitutional protections to nationalist heritage as well. To summarise, a solid assurance from Irish nationalists that Unionist heritage and culture will be preserved and protected for future generations would serve to convince Unionists that there is indeed a place for us and our culture in a united Ireland, and would help to alleviate some of the mistrust that we currently hold towards the idea of unity. There is also the fact that there are still a number of Unionist monuments that exist on the Republic side of the border, which survived the cultural purge that claimed so many others. Ensuring that these southern pieces of Unionist heritage are maintained and protected could also help to ease Unionists into a united Ireland, as they can be used to show us that we do actually have cultural connections to the rest of the island outside of Ulster. Some examples of such Unionist monuments south of the border include the Wellington Testimonial and Fusiliers Arch in Dublin, the Prince Albert statue outside of Leinster House, and the Wellington Monument in Trim. Some of the grandest buildings in the Republic have their origins in the Unionist tradition as well, such as the old Irish Houses of Parliament, Dublin Castle, and even Leinster House itself. All of these things could be considered part of our physical heritage that exists outside of our 6 counties of Northern Ireland, and, like I said, could serve to ease us into a united Ireland by showing us that we do in fact have real genuine links to the rest of the island, even if they were forgotten over the course of the last century. And so, I believe that ensuring that this southern heritage is preserved alongside our northern heritage would not only go a long way towards easing Unionist fears, but also go a long way towards the integration of Unionists into the new order. Another thing which I believe could help in this regard has to do with the Boyne Obelisk. Like I said earlier, it was historically one of, if not the most important pieces of physical heritage to the Unionist tradition prior to its destruction. In its destroyed state, it serves as an example of the sort of negative designs Irish nationalism has on our culture and heritage. And so, why not change the obelisk from a negative symbol of nationalism's intentions into a positive one by having it rebuilt? As symbols of reconciliation go, I don't believe there could be many more powerful than giving us back the Boyne Obelisk, and it would certainly be a very effective way to generate trust and goodwill towards Irish nationalists and towards the idea of Irish unity from the ever distrustful Unionist community. There is an argument that I've heard made against this idea, which is that some nationalists may not be comfortable with the Boyne Obelisk's return, with it often being described as a triumphalist monument. After all, it effectively celebrates a battle in which the Orange tradition was victorious over the Green. However, I would argue that the willingness to tolerate that which we don't necessarily approve of is key to making Irish unity work. There are dozens of examples all over the island of Ireland of Republican monuments celebrating Republican victories, usually successful IRA ambushes during the War of Independence. There are also dozens of statues commemorating Republican figures, many of whom would have been considered enemies of the Unionist tradition in their day. I am completely willing to tolerate all of these as a Unionist, and, as I previously said, I would fully support having any and all legal protection afforded to Unionist heritage apply to nationalist heritage as well. And on that point, I will also say as a Unionist that I would not want to see any Irish nationalist statues or monuments removed, even those that I may not be entirely comfortable with. And believe me, there are some which can be very hard to stomach, such as the Solohead Beg Ambush Memorial in County Tipperary, which celebrates the killing of 2 Irish policemen by the IRA in 1919. These were James MacDonald, who was a native Irish speaker and whose status as a widower saw 7 children left orphaned by his death, and Patrick O'Connell, who had been due to get married not long after he was shot and killed. The Boyne Obelisk is infinitely less offensive a memorial than something like this. It commemorates the sacrifice of those who gave their lives at the Battle of the Boyne to win, whilst the Soloheadbeg Memorial can really only be seen to celebrate an act of cold-blooded killing, since none of the 10 IRA men involved made the ultimate sacrifice or even got so much as a scratch on them for that matter, whilst neither of the policemen even got the chance to fire off a shot in self-defence before they were killed. But despite my ill feelings on memorials like the one at Soloheadbeg, I still would not advocate for their removal. To remove them would not only mean taking something important away from the other tradition for no other reason than that I personally disagree with what they may represent, as well as set the precedent for nationalists to once again do the same thing to us, but it would also see the island of Ireland deprived of some of its living heritage. These monuments have a place in Irish history in the same way that our Unionist monuments have, or in many cases had, and to remove them would, in my opinion, make the entire island of Ireland somehow lesser than before. The willingness to tolerate each other's heritage and act with goodwill towards one another, even if we have very different perspectives on and disagree over many things, is the core of what will make Irish unity work. If we refuse to, and instead attempt to erase that which is important to the other tradition because we don't like it, then Irish unity will be doomed from the get-go. We have actually seen some examples of this in practice in the modern day. In Northern Ireland, there are examples of Republican monuments erected in an official capacity in order to grant the nationalist tradition more cultural representation, such as the statues of Mary Ann McCracken and Winifred Carney, erected outside of Belfast City Hall in 2024. There is one more suggestion that I'll make before wrapping up this video, and that is the idea of creating a sort of neutral reconciliation monument. Something simple which symbolically commemorates everyone from both sides of the divide who has ever suffered or died as a result of the ethnic conflict throughout Irish history. I think that the erection of such a monument would show that whilst neither tradition's heartaches will be ignored or forgotten, we are finally able to move past the bitterness that caused all those heartaches to begin with. It could echo the message of the Irish First World War Memorial in Belgium in that way: reconciliation and forgiveness, and the ability to finally move on and work together to create a future for both traditions. Anyways, in the next video, I will be talking about how I believe the Unionist tradition could be integrated into a united Ireland, and how the Unionist community could adapt once we are no longer in the United Kingdom. Until then, see you later.